Hello, my name is Marcos Bretón. I am the California opinion editor for the Sacramento Bee and McClatchy newspapers. We want to welcome you to our recall election night live stream, and we have an outcome to discuss already. Just before we went live, the Associated Press called the race over. Governor Gavin Newsom has survived a recall. He did what former Governor Gray Davis was not able to do. Governor Newsom was able to hold on to his seat, hold on to it decisively if the numbers hold as they are now. And we need to caution that it's still early. The victory is not in the balance anymore, but the numbers may change between now and tomorrow and the next couple of days. But if the numbers hold as they are now, Newsom's victory could be as decisive as it was when he was first elected in the 2018 election cycle. And if that's the case, if the California Republican Party was not able to come in figuratively through the back door, through a recall process that many feel has a threshold that is too low to qualify for the ballot, one wonders the future of the California Republican Party. And one wonders what holds now for Governor Newsom, since in a few short months, his regularly scheduled election cycle for re-election will begin. With me this evening are my two brilliant colleagues, Lara Korte and Sophia Bollag, who covered the campaign from the beginning. And I want to welcome them both. Welcome.
Hi, Marcos.
So in a sense, all three of us look very nice, and we're all dressed up with no place to go at this point since the election is over. So Lara, let's start with you. The numbers are in. If you could give us a sense in terms of what the numbers say and what they mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So we first saw returns coming in shortly after polls closed at 8 p.m. And it was very clear that Newsom had a sizable lead. We don't have all the votes in right now. That's important to note, as you said. But I'm looking at the Associated Press, which has called elections for a long time. They're showing a no vote right now with 66.8% and the yes vote with 33.2%. A lot of outlets have already called it. The AP has called it. I don't know if it's appropriate to call this a landslide for Newsom. I don't think we'll know that till everything is said and done. But it certainly was over a lot quicker than I think some people anticipated. We were thinking maybe it could be close tonight. Maybe there might be a few days where we don't know who won, but it was called within the hour. So that's something very interesting, something that I think Newsom will point out.
And Sophia, how it seemed that, so I'll rewind a little bit. In late July, the Sacramento Bee McClatchy opinion team sat down with Governor Newsom. And I remember vividly on that late afternoon, he looked tired. He looked frustrated. And in that moment, the potential threat to him seemed very real. Now, that wasn't that long ago. It's less than 2 months at that point. So can you tell us just sort of what was going on at that point that made this race seem for a moment that it was close?
Yeah, I think the word I used in my story to describe the way he was in that interview was dour. He was not happy, it seemed, with the way that things were turning out. He suggested in that interview with McClatchy's editorial boards that the Democratic Party at the national level wasn't, fully considering what it would mean if he lost. And at that point, polling was really showing that likely voters were basically the enthusiasm related to the recall was really on the side of people who supported recalling Newsom. And that means that the likely voters in these polls were more skewed toward those who wanted to recall him. Now that was notable and kind of surprising because Democrats in California outnumber registered Republicans nearly 2-1. California is a very blue state. There's a lot of liberal voters here. And so it was surprising to see polling showing the race essentially neck and neck. But since those early polls in late July and early to mid-August, Democrats showed that they were really able to close that enthusiasm gap. And Newsom's campaign basically doubled down on convincing people that this recall election was important. It was important for them to cast ballots. They couldn't just assume that Newsom would win because he's a Democrat and California is a blue state, that it was actually important for them to participate. And so, as we saw tonight, they were able to make up that enthusiasm gap.
Lara, what would you say, was there a change in a revision of strategy that the governor employed that might have made a difference as well?
I think there were certain things that influenced Newsom's strategy in this. When he came out during the State of the State earlier this year, before the recall had even qualified for the ballot, he wanted to paint this as an effort by Republicans. He wanted to paint it as an effort by Trump Republicans and warn that this was Republicans trying to bring Trump to California. But that was kind of a vague and a little bit blurry message, I think, for a lot of Democrats. Once Larry Elder entered the scene in July, I think that gave Newsom a much more tangible and clear picture to point to and say, this is the type of thing that is going to affect you. And I think that really motivated Democrats. Newsom used that to his advantage multiple times, notably within the last week when there was the abortion ban at 6 weeks in Texas. That was a national point that Newsom could point to and say, hey, the guy that's in the running for this recall is anti-abortion and wants to outlaw abortion. And that's what you're going to get unless you get out and you vote for me. It's an off year. The election wasn't held on, a typical election day. So I think there certainly was a knowledge gap and a motivation gap that Newsom had to overcome. They ran a really robust ground game. They had thousands of volunteers sending texts, knocking on doors. Newsom really out fundraised the other Republican candidates, tens of millions of dollars. He had people like Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren showing up, doing ads for him. And of course, we saw Joe Biden yesterday in Long Beach talk specifically about Donald Trump and warn voters again today. So I think that the elder factor can't be underestimated when it comes to motivating Democrats. I think we see people on both sides of the aisle say that Elder's entrance into this race was a real gift for the Newsom campaign.
Sophia, let's stay with that point. When Larry Elder jumped into the campaign, at first there was some question as to whether he was going to be able to qualify for the race, and it took a judge's ruling for him to qualify. But once he did, what was the impact that he had on the race initially and then over time?
Yeah, I think Lara summed up pretty well, what impact he had in terms of motivating Democrats. I would also note, though, that he did motivate a lot of conservatives to vote in this recall and support him. He came into this with a devoted following. He's a radio talk show host by profession, and he has developed a really big following, particularly down in LA, but also across the state. And so he really energized those voters, got a lot of conservatives excited about this recall. But as I said before, excitement was sort of always on the side of recall proponents from the beginning. And what probably the most significant thing that Elder did is really put a face to this sort of faceless threat that Newsom was talking about when trying to motivate Democrats, saying, if I'm recalled, it's going to be a Republican. And that didn't, necessarily resonate until there was a top polling Republican that Newsom could really point to and say, look, it's going to be this guy. This is the guy who's going to win if I am recalled. And so I think that helped to motivate liberal voters to turn out for Newsom tonight.
So there were a fair number of what one could call establishment Republicans who jumped in. Kevin Kiley, for one, locally. Ted Gaines, for a while. Doug Osee, before he dropped out for health reasons. Kevin Faulconer. I suppose we can call John Cox mainstream since he was the Republican nominee in 2018. So what was it that Larry Elder had that seemed to energize the base more than the mainstream candidates? Was it simply his radio profile, or were there other factors? And I would throw that to either one of you.
I think it's hard to say. I think that there is definitely a lot of support for Elder among certain demographics. People know him from his radio career. I will admit that I wasn't super familiar with him until he entered the race.
How was I?
Yeah. So, I think it's hard to say. I will say that he has a lot, let's say, stronger views. I think it's safe to say that some of his views are a little more to the right of some of the candidates. He definitely has espoused those views in books and movies and his columns. When you have people like Kevin Faulconer, who is trying to be a little bit more moderate, a little bit more practical, a little bit more middle of the road, he called himself the vanilla candidate. I think that may be appealing to some people, but Elder definitely catches the eye of people, and he's saying what a lot of people want to hear. He's echoing their frustrations with the Democratic Party. He's echoing their frustrations around various social justice issues like race and feminism and COVID-19 and masking and vaccines. I think, he'll say that he can relay ideas in a way that Joe and Joan's six-pack can relate to. And I think there's something to that. I think he knows how to talk to people about the issues they care about, and that definitely helped him.
What, Sophia, how would you say that Larry Elder affected the tone of this race?
So it was really interesting what happened when Larry Elder entered and sort of how that changed things. Essentially, on question 2, it essentially became like a Republican primary where you had Larry Elder running to the right. And you didn't see, a candidate like Kevin Faulconer, who was running a much more centrist, much more moderate campaign to appeal to people in the middle. That didn't really have much traction. You also saw, at the end here, claims by Larry Elder and also former President Donald Trump of voter fraud, even before there were any, results in the election or any evidence of widespread voter fraud. And that, changed the tone, I think, of the election as well. Those claims, the fact that Elder had a campaign or page on his campaign website, a story that Lara broke that, essentially was written as if Newsom had already won. And that, bringing up the allegations of fraud, I think, has primed a lot of Californians who supported Elder to question the validity of the results. So I think it's too early to say how much traction those are going to have, given how wide the margin appears to be at this point for Newsom's victory. But that's certainly a dynamic that Larry Elder helped introduce into this race.
So I need to say that both of you broke terrific stories on this campaign, and I respect your professionalism very much, particularly since you're sitting here talking to me when I'm sure your instinct is to be writing the story. So just a few more questions, and then we'll let you get back to work. Sophia, staying with you, talk about how the governor used COVID-19 as a strategy.
Yeah, it's really interesting how COVID has really shaped this race. Many of the early recall supporters cited Newsom's COVID-19 policies as reasons that they wanted to recall him. They felt like his restrictions were infringing on people's liberties. They were angry that the shutdown orders caused small businesses to close and lose money. But in the end, Newsom has really doubled down on his approach to COVID and really leaned into his reputation as being one of the most, if not the most aggressive governor in terms of imposing restrictions to fight the spread of COVID-19. He's talked a lot on the campaign trail in the last couple of weeks about how his leading challengers, particularly Larry Elder, but also all the other leading candidates running to replace him, they all said that they would rescind his mask and vaccine mandates, which is something that Newsom said would cause more people to die, would cause infection rates to go up. And he pointed to the examples of Florida and Texas, which have had higher per capita death rates and have seen much more lax restrictions than California. So in the end, that policy decision that he made to impose tough restrictions in California that got him a lot of criticism from recall supporters and helped generate support for the recall, that was really his closing argument for why people shouldn't recall him, that was the right strategy and that saved lives. And so that was really how he made his final message to voters.
Well, the numbers certainly, if the numbers hold, that certainly is a statement on that. Lara, where do you think Gavin Newsom goes from here, and how do you think Newsom and the Democrats will take this victory, and what will they do with it?
That's a good question. Gavin Newsom has to go to a primary election in June in just a few short months. I actually saw another reporter tweet that the 2022 election cycle just begun. I think that they're going to probably move pretty seamlessly from this into the next election. Something that I think is interesting, I've been waffling back and forth on whether this is a benefit for Newsom having such a margin, if the margins do hold, having this kind of victory, or if it's, to his detriment that he faced a recall election. I think something that's of note, there were a lot of people talking about how Newsom would probably do well unless something horrible happened. We were in June handing out money for vaccines. We were celebrating a return to normal life. And then cases rose again. There was a lot of returning to masks. The kind of celebratory attitude we saw at the beginning of the summer waned a little bit, and we had extremely severe wildfires. And so I think that the things that Democrats were afraid of going wrong still went wrong, and he still managed to survive. So I think that's something that they'll definitely keep in mind going into next year, what it means for his political future after the governorship. Maybe I'll leave that to Sophia to speculate on.
Well, I was going to ask Sophia, so let's stay on that point in terms of what will happen now in terms of is there an expectation among Democrats that either Newsom will, quote, learn a lesson, unquote, from this moment, or that will he govern more confidently, given that when it was all said and done, despite misgivings that people had with him, that the voters turned out to keep him in office?
He's been asked a number of times in press conferences that I've attended if he's going to, take any lessons from this recall, from hearing from disgruntled Californians about his policies, if he's going to make any changes. And whenever I've heard him answer that question, he really doesn't give any specifics of things that he plans to do differently. And I think that there's no indication that I've seen in his rhetoric or his behavior on the campaign trail that would suggest he's going to go in a different direction. If anything, I would expect him to double down on the policies that he is already trying to implement and the campaign promises that he made back in 2018 in terms of the agenda that he set out for himself then.
So in the few moments we have left, let's talk about a couple things. One, Lara, if we could talk about what can we expect the Democrats to do now to address the recall process and raising the threshold potentially to make it harder for another recall to happen?
Right. That's definitely something that Democrats are looking at. I know lawmakers are going to be talking about that first thing in the morning. The thing is that California has a relatively easy process for recalling a state official compared to other states. I'd like to use the example of my home state of Kansas. Over there, you have to get 40% of the votes that were cast in the last election as recall signatures. In California, that threshold is only 12%. In Kansas, you also have 90 days to do it. In California, you have 160 days. And in the Newsom recall, they got an extension. So they got an extra 120 days. The point being that basically some people argue that it's too easy to recall a governor in California. We're going to see people rallying to raise that threshold from 12%. I've seen 20 to 25%. People have also thrown out the idea that maybe instead of a replacement candidate, you would have the lieutenant governor rise to the position of governor if the sitting incumbent was recalled. There's also a concern that a small percentage of votes can go to a replacement candidate, but they could still win the governor's seat. So even if, let's say, Larry Elder, holds steady with 30% of the vote, if enough people voted on question 1 to recall Gavin Newsom, that means that Larry Elder would have won without a majority of the vote, which is not how it is in normal election cycles. So people want to change it so that whoever gets the most votes actually is the one who stays in office. There are a number of proposed ways to change that, but there's definitely a concern that things need to change. This is a 110-year-old practice, and people want to adjust it.
And let's start to wrap it up with the future. In the days leading up to this day, Larry Elder, the leading Republican candidate, began using the fraud word to describe this process. And then former President Trump took it even further. First question first. So for Sophia, I know that Kevin Faulconer said unequivocally that he would accept the outcome. What about other quote unquote mainstream Republicans? What about the California Republican Party? What have they said, or what do you think they will say about the whole fraud question?
Yeah, so as for the other leading candidates in a debate hosted by the San Francisco Chronicle that had 4 of the leading candidates, it was the 3 leading Republicans other than Larry Elder, John Cox, Kevin Kiley, and Kevin Faulconer, and then also the leading Democrat in the polls, Kevin Paffrath. And all 4 of them said that they would accept the results of the election. As for the Republican Party recognized that they needed to convince their voters that they could trust the election in order to convince them that they should vote. And so they actually launched a campaign in the last couple of weeks to convince voters that it would be safe for them to vote, that they were closely watching the polls to ensure that there weren't any instances of fraud that they were able to catch, and to make sure that every vote was counted and counted accurately. And they ran a number of ads assuring Republicans in California that that was happening, and assuring them that they could trust the process. So I would say that the state party at this point in the lead up to the election, and I haven't seen any statements from them or from the candidates since we've been on this live stream, which we started shortly after the call was made. So it could be that there's a lot going on Twitter that we just haven't seen yet. But as far as I've heard from the party, they were encouraging people to trust the process and to go vote.
Is there a feeling among mainstream Republicans, whether or an admission, either on the record or off the record, whether President Trump's rhetoric about the election systems, in this case, potentially harmed Republican candidates, because there were some Republican voters who just, because of what they heard on whatever news channels they watched, they did not go out and vote because they felt that it was rigged.
Sorry if I can take that. I will say that I don't know if Republicans are concerned necessarily about this hampering votes. I know that there are Republicans who are certainly not a fan of it and think that it's wrong. Ron Nearing, who is a former California GOP chair, said that Elder's actions regarding voter fraud were, quote, the most irresponsible act I've ever seen from a California candidate in my 20 years in politics here. So there's certainly Republicans who are saying, hey, this is a bad idea. This is dangerous. Don't do this. But I think that whether there's going to have a real impact on voter turnout has yet to be seen. I haven't heard that concern from Republican officials about this hampering turnout, and I have seen them encouraging people to vote. I spoke with Jessica Milan Patterson just last week, and she said she's voted by mail for a long time. She encourages people to vote. She thinks it's safe. So we'll see.
What does Larry Elder do now?
I think he's going to. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lara.
No, I was going to say the same thing. It sounds like he's looking to keep running for some kind of office. I don't know which one. He wants to stay on the political stage. That's what he told a radio station today.
Yeah, I think if he decides to run in 2022 for the gubernatorial primary, he certainly has a big base of support. Last I checked, the AP numbers, he was way ahead of everyone else on the vote tally on that second question for replacement candidates. And so I think if he wants to run for governor again in the regular election, he has a real platform to do that. Whether he would fare any better than, he wasn't running directly against Newsom, so it's not really a fair comparison. But how he would do, I should say, in a primary election or a general election against Newsom, I don't know. But it seems like he has emerged as the front runner among at least the recall field. So that would put him in theoretically a good position to run again next year.
Did Elder ever end up participating in any debates?
He did not, no.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I think that it's best to let our two journalist friends get back to work. Lara and Sophia, we want to thank you for joining us, and good luck on your stories. And thank you for your fantastic coverage during the campaign. And with that, we are nearing the end of our 30 minutes with you. We were joined by Sophia Bollag and by Lara Korte. They're going to go back to their work, and you can read their stories on sacbee.com tonight, tomorrow. You can also read an editorial that should have posted while I was sitting here speaking with you from the Sacramento Bee editorial board on the event, on the outcome this evening. No matter the outcome, it was a historic event. It's not every day that a governor of California is recalled. It's happened once. It didn't happen this time. And we will wake up tomorrow and see where our state leads. We have a number of crisis issues facing our state. We have a homeless crisis. We have wildfires. We have COVID-19. We have an affordable housing crisis. Victory or no victory, Gavin Newsom has a daunting job ahead of him when he wakes up tomorrow morning. He'll feel good, but he'll also be facing the same issues that he was facing before. It remains to be seen whether he will govern differently, whether he'll govern more effectively or confidently. But the voters demand a lot from him. The job demands a lot from him. And those of us here at the Sacramento Bee, both on the news side and on the opinion side, will be working to put those issues that the governor is facing into context. Those of us on the opinion team are trying to raise issues about the campaigns, about the candidates, about the issues in ways that engage you as readers. We hope that you subscribe to the Sacramento Bee, and we hope that you join us again the next time we gather for an important event such as this one. So for my colleagues, Sophia Bollag and Lara Korte, for my colleagues in the Sacramento Bee Capitol Bureau and in the newsroom, and for my teammates on the Sacramento Bee opinion team and on our California opinion team, we thank you very much for joining us. We hope that you read the Bee and you subscribe to the Bee, and we hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Good night.